Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus, exules filii Eve, a te suspiramus, gementes et flentes. Advocata nostra, stulos tuos misericordes oculos a nos converter, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, proclamen Sophia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Ave Maria. Gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae.
And we are live, and I am joined by the incredible and the phenomenal Dr. Stephen Boyce. Yeah, man, I got to be honest, man. You rock, man, and I'm happy to have you here, brother. I've been with you in your show already. I haven't had you here yet. Happy to be here with you, brother. How you been, my friend?
Been doing well, staying busy, and obviously was just on Trent Horn's channel recently, so that sparked a lot of other invites, and so we're finally getting around to doing one together outside of my channel on yours. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, this is great stuff. Now, of course, kept it under wraps a little bit, but I knew you were going to become Catholic a little minute ago. But of course, waited until the announcement became, I guess, everybody found out. And with good reason, people are bringing you on to their channels, and you're going to have a lot of fun. Now, with that in mind, I got to ask you, I don't know if they've asked you yet. What was the main reason? Was there a turning point, man? I don't know if anybody's thrown that at you yet, but I got to toss that one in. Was there one kind of turning point, or was it kind of, a bunch of stuff that made you say, hey, you know what? I gotta go Catholic?
Yeah, it was one thing that I talked about on multiple channels, but it was kind of asked from different angles, right? And
Yeah.
so one of the questions that moving into Anglicanism years ago that I continually found myself having with priests, whether they were more on the Protestant or the Anglo-Catholic side, was
Sure.
basically, what do we do with Rome? I mean, even the more low church Anglican groups like the ACNA were still sending delegates with Cardinal Fernandez in Rome to have conversations
Yeah.
about communion, or how do we have some sort of restoration communion. And these are low church Anglicans. And then obviously the high church Anglicans, and whether you look at the Anglo Catholics in G3, they were corresponding with the different delegates and trying to send people to Rome to talk about communion. So they
Sure.
kind of incited this idea that we need Rome in some way, shape, or form. They'll say on one side they don't, but then why are you sending delegates to have conversations of
Yeah.
communion? And so the more that I went through that, the more Anglo-Catholic I became and accepted a lot of some of these doctrines, like say the teachings on Mary, whether she was bodily assumed, immaculate
Yeah.
conception, perpetual virginity, purgatory. I took more of a Benedict XVI approach, C.S. Lewis, and I was like, wow, actually, I can accept purgatory when I look at it from these angles.
Yeah.
So those things kind of happened while I was still Anglo-Catholic. But once I settled the matter of papacy, and it was really the ecumenical councils with Michael Lofton and Eric Ibarra, who were majorly influential at talking about how even the East had signed on to some of these things, that I realized more and more, like, what made England unified in 601? It was the Pope. What
Oh
was it
yeah.
that kept things together during these times? It was the Pope. And the papacy
Yeah.
has gone through ups and downs. It's had bad popes, good popes, but the See of Peter has sustained itself through God's grace, and he must be doing something in Rome that hasn't been done in any of these other groups.
Yeah. There's no doubt you need the papacy, plain and simple. And I have said it many times over. And here in my channel, I've got a number of Eastern Orthodox moderators. They're great. They're awesome. And I
Sure.
even have Oriental Orthodox moderators. A lot of near and dear friends over there. But I wear my faith on my sleeve, and I'm very clear about it. And I say it often. Um, for people looking into an apostolic church, and I know many people have told me, "Hey, I'm a catechumen. I'm thinking of entering into Orthodoxy or what have you."
Mhm.
You can have an issue when it comes to dialoguing about the papacy, especially as you brought it up. The fact that the early church viewed the papacy as integral to the Christian faith, lacking that is a bit of an issue, I'd say. And then you look at how the early church acted, how they lived out their lives, how they
Mhm.
operated throughout all the centuries, and it's a bit of a crux without the papacy, isn't that right?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you look at the Anglican communion today, there is no communion amongst the Anglican communion. The
Yeah,
two-thirds majority are considered the so-called conservative Anglicans because they have removed themselves from the leadership of Canterbury, which was the mother church.
right.
And the Episcopals had fallen in line with them because the Episcopals went woke and liberal.
Oh
And
yeah,
so the one third is the ones that are holding the actual keys to the so-called communion, but two-thirds have not joined into their leadership and have submitted to it anymore. And now there's new breakoffs, whether you're talking about the Global South, GAFCON, and now there's groups within that. It's like, well, we're the conservatives. Meanwhile, they can't agree on what Orthodox Anglicanism is, because
yeah,
more than half of those accept women's orders and still call themselves conservative. And the others say, no, you're not. You're not conservative. You've allowed these ideas to take over the church. And so now you have groups like in the Anglo Catholics who do not take communion from priests in these other groups like the ACNA. So they can paint this up, and really it is a disaster. And the more I spend time
yeah,
in Anglicanism, the more I realize that there is no unity, and it takes dogma, it takes infallible decrees, it takes
yeah.
encyclicals to bring to order and unity. Not that the Catholic Church is perfect and has like perfect unity here,
Right.
but there are definitive lines that have been drawn that cannot be crossed. And so there are things that I noticed very quickly, that England is right back to where it was before 601 and
Yeah,
before Pope Gregory sent Augustine of Canterbury to bring unity. And what was it that brought unity in 601? It was the papacy. What is it that's going to bring unity to the Anglicanism in 2026? It's got to be the papacy. And
yeah,
so when the Anglican ordinariate or the personal ordinariate became possible, where Anglicans could come back into full communion with the papacy and continue English patrimony and continue prayer book and usage and English rite. To me, it was a no-brainer. The best of both worlds. The things I fell in love with and about Anglicanism were retained. The things that Anglicanism needed were there. Also, I want to give a shout out in the audience. I saw my wife over there. She says ex-Anglican. Haha. So my wife's in the, I actually have students listening too who probably should be studying. But I give a shout out to them. I think they're in the live chat too. So I saw their comments earlier. There's my wife, Claire.
And we've got a brother, by the way, who is loves your stuff. The brother Sergio says, thrilled and pumped to see another ex-Anglican here. The brother is just recently became Catholic. He left Anglicanism, and we're hoping, Sergio, we're hoping to bring your father on over as well to Catholicism. That's what we're hoping to do as well.
Listen, I love the Anglican Church, by the way. I love Anglicans. I'm friends with many, many Anglicans, and even the Archbishop of the APA, Bishop Chandler Jones, is a wonderful man of God. He was nothing but good to my family, knowing we were attending Catholic masses and studying and praying. And he at no point rebuked us, tried to correct us, tried to tell us we were doing something wrong. And when I sent him the final script that we were going to be moving into full communion with Rome, he wished us the best and wanted to maintain friendship. So, if an archbishop can have that kind of disposition and attitude, I have nothing but love and respect.
Yeah. And have you remained in good terms, in touch with him?
Yeah. Yep. And he
Praise
wants
the Lord.
to, and his exact
God.
words were, I want to maintain what we started. So
praise God. Praise God. Well, today we're going to be looking at a video from Dr. Gavin Ortlund, a video that is asks the question about the validity of Protestant churches, in particular about the Holy Eucharist. And it's a video that I'm glad that we're going to check out. We're going to go over, and it'd be helpful for the audience. Let's put it up. About a minute and a half, you're going to get the gist of what the video is about immediately. So let me put the video up. I think the first minute and a half will let the audience know what we're going to be touching upon, and I've got some timestamps, so we're going to dive in.
Protestant churches, valid churches with a valid Eucharist. The non-Protestant traditions generally say no, though there's a lot of nuances we'll need to work through here. And the rationale for that has to do with apostolic succession, which we're going to define and work through in this video. And I want to argue for the validity of Protestant churches and Eucharists in Protestant contexts. We'll go in 3 steps: framing, historical evidence, then a final theological appeal, which is summing up everything in the most important part of this video.
Now, the one thing that I do want to stop and touch upon immediately, and we'll get into the meat of the matter in a moment, is the one point that we've got to make is that within Protestantism, and I'm not entirely certain, I've got the timestamps, I'm not entirely certain if Dr. Ortlund dives into that later on, but one thing that we need to be very clear about is the view of the Eucharist within Protestantism is hardly a unified view.
it's not even close.
Not even remotely close.
So I mean, the Lutherans take a very different approach from more of your Calvinist groups, for example. And then, I mean, you have your post-Reformation Anabaptist influence that is even more radical than Zwingli himself, who believe it is merely symbolic and only memorial. And so there is a far cry of a line, because there's actually some Protestants that aren't too far away from the Catholic view. They're not that far. And then there's some that think that their view would be almost heretical in some sense.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of my students.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. I don't know. They don't speak Spanish, so I don't know where they're getting this from here.
Really?
Well, maybe they do. I mean, they had to take Spanish class. So
right.
So
I was about to say, you got plenty of people that are following you in Spanish. All right. That's cool, though. That's great.
Well, you might have to translate that, but on the Spanish, because I'm not even sure my own students are putting in here. That's hilarious.
Yeah, they're saying, Dr. Boyce, you're very intelligent. And then Maya Wilkins says, yes, Dr. Boyce, I totally agree with you. So yeah, I think.
Too bad they don't have me. Too bad they don't have me this semester. No extra credit for them. So.
Oh, yeah, no extra credit, man. So no, nothing extra there. But you bring up a number of great points there, and that really is an issue. Depending on which Protestant you talk to, their views are all over the map. They're all over the place. And the one thing that I can say is we wrote a book on transubstantiation a few years back. It's been more than a couple now. A few years back, I wrote a book on transubstantiation, and the book that we wrote on transubstantiation, this book right here, I had a chapter in the book written by an Oriental Orthodox scholar, and another chapter written by an Eastern Orthodox scholar. And despite using different language, all of us came to the same conclusion that transubstantiation is a reality. But you don't find that unity in Protestantism at all, do you, Dr. Boyce?
No. And that's the point, that they have splintered from view to view to view off of each other, where they've never, like, there's not like a declaration or a council or something where all Protestants from different reformers came together and said, like, let's agree on this. I mean, even Luther and Calvin, who are very early on, I mean, Luther took more of a, and they would all deny the word consubstantiation, but something similar to that. And but very much so, when you look at Calvin, he was more pneumatic about how he looked at the Eucharist. So they were different from each other, and they had no problem corresponding. And then Zwingli, obviously Luther and Zwingli just couldn't stand each other.
Oh, they hated each other's
massive
guts.
difference. So
yeah.
The earliest forms of the Protestant Reformation, the main heads, these patriarchs, if you would, of the Protestant Reformation, could not establish the proper view of Eucharist from day one. So much more on now 500 years.
Now, in your opinion, I'd love to hear your opinion, because my opinion is this, and I've had very healthy dialogues. I've got a number of friends that are Lutheran scholars, and I've had very healthy dialogues with them. At the end of the day, my conclusion is that Luther did teach consubstantiation. I don't know if that would be a conclusion that you'd come to. What are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's what Luther himself taught. I know that Lutherans do not like that.
Sure,
so
they don't.
Whether they themselves would have ever given that kind of credence to Luther himself, they themselves would like to avoid the term at all costs.
Sure.
So naturally, they're going to say that he hinted at ideas of it, or that he utilized terminology that would be consistent with that, but overall that wasn't his ultimate position. So they would deny it, but I think he himself could be labeled that accurately, but maybe not so much Lutherans today.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. And shout out to the brother Sergio says, Brother Dr. Boyce, as I hear your testimony, it is like listening to my own internal struggle. Thank you for listening to God's voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Awesome. Very, very awesome. Now, let's hear a little bit more.
For non-Protestant viewers, please know that I submit this argument respectfully and hoping to maintain friendship, even knowing we will likely disagree. Before diving in, let's approach and clarify the issue before us with a case study that can make it vivid, and kind of show the cash value at the street level of this topic. And this is something I've referenced in my previous video, Why Protestant is More Catholic. It comes out of my book, Area of the New Testament. Translate the scripture into their language. They elect their own overseers who preside over worship services during which they recite the Apostles' Creed, sing, pray, read the scriptures, and celebrate the Eucharist. Question: is it a church? And does such an entity have a valid Eucharist? Now, the appeal, by the way, that I made in that previous video I mentioned is not an appeal to emotion, but we're looking at the criteria of the New Testament.
Now, I want to pause there for one moment, and I'd love to get your thoughts, because what he's claiming here for the audience, we're going to break it down for you. He is saying, and he believes, and I marked down what I clearly believe Dr. Ortlund would agree, he believes these to be strong points. He's saying that, okay, we have a community, they have faith in Christ, they have a valid Trinitarian baptism, they have real conversions, they have real healings, they read the Bible, the Word of God, they elect overseers, they've got real creeds, worship. And then he says, okay, they've got the Eucharist. He says, should that count as a church? And then he tosses that in, should their Eucharist be valid? Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I think that it's a loaded question. He tosses in a bunch of things in there. And ultimately, I've got to be very honest here. Catholicism already grants much of what he is laying out here, just not the valid Eucharist, right?
It's true. Yeah,
right.
I mean, obviously, when I came into full communion with Rome, I didn't have to be so-called rebaptized or
there you go.
Anything. So, like, at the end of the day, because I was baptized in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, so the baptism was deemed valid. As were my children, who were baptized as Anglicans. They were easily brought in. My wife, as a Baptist, was baptized. And so when we're talking about it from that perspective, the church has made it very clear throughout, or especially since Vatican II, that there are true things that have happened and are happening outside of the Catholic Church itself.
Yes.
And I've said it this way before too, because, you know, when you look at the sacraments and we talk about the 7 sacraments, my statement has always been is that God is not bound by the sacraments,
Right.
but he is bountiful in the sacraments. And so when we're looking at Catholicism, when we're talking about it, it's not a question of, is God operating and is God giving grace? Is God working? Is God convicting? Is God drawing? Of course he is. The question is the fullness of his promises and gifts found in these things? And the answer is no. I mean, I've said this before. I said this on the show the other night. When I took my first, if you would, Eucharist in an Anglican church, it was an ACNA church. My wife and I went. I don't know if the Eucharist itself was a valid Eucharist, but I know this, that when my wife and I experienced liturgy for the first time we took Eucharist, something in us changed. Was it because of the sacrament? Was it despite the sacrament that was offered? I don't know. But I know this, God used that to create a hunger in me that led me ultimately to the true church. And so I'm not going to sit here and stronghold God and say, well, it was an invalid sacrament, so nothing happened, as if God can't work despite certain things. Sure, he can. That's not even the question. I think the audience understands. We're not saying God is stronghold and he can't do anything if it's not done under the demise of what has been described to us by the church. But the question is about fullness. The question is about its completeness. Can that be done in these contexts? And the answer is no.
That's a great way you laid it out. A phenomenal way you did, because as you pointed out, yes, Catholicism already is granting much of what he wants here, just not the valid Eucharist part. And
Correct.
Indeed, and here's the thing. Look, the church explicitly recognizes that there are, as you laid it out brilliantly, there are real Christian realities outside her visible boundaries. The church has always taught that. And the church recognizes valid Trinitarian baptism. The church can acknowledge what we would call authentic fruits of grace, of conversion. Look, I believe God was working through me in my life when I was a Protestant, when I was a Calvinist. I believe that. I truly do. You can even find people that have heroic holiness within those churches. Nobody's denying that. But then we get to that other question that he did ask where we paused it. And as tough as it may sound, none of that automatically implies valid holy orders or valid Eucharistic consecration. It just doesn't. Well, at least not in this case. Now, when we hear fruit, good fruit, exorcisms, what have you, you read more and you look more at it, you hear more of the arguments he's making. But these passages are not in and of themselves, sacramental validity criteria. They concern, and we agree, that God can work in many ways, in miraculous ways, in wonderful ways. There's no doubt. Nobody denies that. But it's a whole other question as to whether or not there is that sacramental office, that sacramental power to confect the Eucharist. And of course, we wouldn't believe that to be the case.
No. And this is the difference too, because when we talk about the ends justifying the means, if you have to go to the results of positive effect, and therefore, since there are positive effects, we have to conclude that there's something valid here. I mean, that goes against everything the biblical texts teach us. Should we sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. God forbid, as the old King James says. So just because something good and God's grace can be given despite something doesn't mean the methodology is correct in the way God instituted it. So when we start with the results as the means of our arguments, the results are positive, therefore God must be doing something. But is God doing it because of or despite of? And that's the question. And so I'm not saying that they've conflated the idea of valid orders, positive effects. And if there's positive effects, then it has to be valid. God doing good things is because God is good. that doesn't mean because you are good or I am good or we're doing it good or we're doing it right. And sometimes God does things because a lot of people, when I was a Protestant, was in ignorance and unbelief. And God did it to create a starvation in me. I mean, the way we did the Lord's Supper growing up, I was never happy with. I never walked away going, man, this is what I've always looked for. Like the way that I approach the altar of God today, it all makes sense. My whole life, the thing that I was starving for, but I didn't know what it was, the thing that I was discontent about there, but didn't know how to put it to words, all has found its fulfillment today.
Amen.
And so I believe that even though I did it in ignorance and unbelief, God was giving grace to create starvation so that I could experience the true fullness of his grace in the sacrament itself. So yes, God was operating here, but that doesn't mean that was the end road. And that's the way we should just, well, God did something good, so therefore we approve it and do everything that we just did to get us here. No. God may have done something good despite, in order to draw us to the real thing.
That's a great point. Despite, that's a phenomenal point. And yes, we would affirm, Dr. Ortlund, that nobody's denying that this is a real Christian community, especially if they're baptized in a Trinitarian formula. But again, for the audience that may be wondering, no, they would not thereby have a valid Eucharist, because a valid Eucharist requires a validly ordained priest and valid ordination. What does it require? Well, it requires apostolic succession. And of course, as we know very well, that would require a bishop in the apostolic line ordaining. So again, we can say, and we do recognize, they have the desire, they have the devotion. It's real. God can and God does give grace. Don't ever deny that. Catholics don't, because the church recognizes that God can and God does give grace. But the thing is, it doesn't make that the Eucharist automatically valid because one is sincere or what have you. You need a validly ordained priest.
Agreed.
Yeah. And the brother James, thank you, James, for your support, says, for a church to be valid, they need valid orders and a valid Eucharist. With the exception of Anglicanism, Protestantism lacks any sense of orders in the apostolic understanding. Without valid orders, there is no Eucharist. And then he says, not to say Anglicanism has valid orders, but they're the only ones with the threefold orders. Yet, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's the complicated thing. So this is the argument that I mentioned earlier. When you're talking about some of the Anglo-Catholics, whether you're talking about the ACC or the APA, all of their bishops and priests are under Old Catholic orders or Polish National Catholic orders, which the church does recognize as valid, but simply illicit. And so by their definitions, there are Anglican churches that are operating with valid orders. What was removed in validity and given null and void to was in 1896 under Pope Leo XIII was that of Edwardian orders, because there was a lack of certainty of the correctness and form of ordinations during the time of King Edward. And so some of that was cleared up shortly after Edward died. Some of it was unresolved. And so that led to many, many forms of improper formation in the ordaining of priests. And so it's impossible to validate. So to create an invalid and a nullity there would be to reset the whole system in order to shore up the system. And so not necessarily because of that, but the old Catholics, the Polish National Catholics became close to Anglicans, especially in England and Ireland and places like this.
Yes.
And so they sought the orders of them. These Anglicans sought the orders of them because of women's orders that came much, much later in history. And this is what happened to the Church of England. They were letting women in the priesthood. They were letting women in the Archbishop of the Church of England is now a woman. So that created also invalidity. The Episcopals did the same thing. The same thing happened in New Zealand and in Australia. And so now invalidity has not only come through right, but also through women's orders with women's bishops and women's priests. So the whole thing is muck. So the establishing of some of these Anglican churches are now under Old Catholic and Polish National Catholic orders, which are not in alignment with what was called null and void by Pope Leo XIII. So there are valid Eucharists being offered in Anglican masses, not in the majority, I would say, but they are illicit at the same time. So it's a complex issue when we get into Anglicanism. It's not as clean as we'd like it to be.
It is very complex. That is why I tell my students to not make those blanket statements, because it needs to be nuanced. And I think you nuanced it in a fantastic way there. It isn't always, black and white as some people think. That's a great answer there. A great one. I think you do have a few of your students in the audience, and you definitely have one that saw you on Trents. Shout out to you, Kivo.exe. Audience, for our moderators, we got some great moderators here. If you all can do us a great and a phenomenal favor and share the link to Dr. Boyce's channel, it is in the description, but a lot of the times people don't read channel descriptions. So if you put it there in the chat, and you've got a good audience right now, audience, check his channel out. Do not forget to smack the like in the show and subscribe to his channel. He's doing a lot of really good work. So do him a great favor. And also, if you want to check out his material, don't just subscribe. Put that little bell on. You'll get notifications whenever he goes live.
Oh, thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Definitely. We got great mods here. The very, very best. All right, let's go to this next marker where it is right around here. We go.
Eucharist. That's certainly true for the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. So the question is, why is that? And the answer has to do with apostolic succession. Now, the basic idea of apostolic succession is that there's an unbroken line of bishops extending back from the present day to the apostles, but in its fuller and more technical expressions, apostolic succession usually involves 5 tenets. Number 1, the office of bishop is distinct from the office of presbyter by divine right. Number 2, it is the office of bishop specifically, which is the successor of the apostle. Number 3, bishops have regional jurisdiction within a larger network. So each bishop is not just a local pastor, but has authority over a diocese. Number 4, valid episcopal succession subsists through the laying on of hands from one bishop to another. And number 5, here's where it plays out in terms of the case study I gave. Apart from valid apostolic succession, there is normally no valid ordained ministry or holy orders, and thus no valid Eucharist. Now, there is a kind of apostolic succession that is affirmed by some Protestant groups, especially among the Anglicans, some Lutherans, Moravians, and Neo-Hussites. But apostolic succession is usually not interpreted as restrictively within these groups. For example, in the Anglican tradition, you can find people like Richard Hooker, wonderful theologian, who thinks that the episcopate has apostolic roots and enjoys divine approval, but is not strictly by divine law.
What do you think of what he said so far? You have any particular thoughts? I know you've heard this very often. You've heard these arguments.
Yeah, there's some nuance to this that is a little bit surprising, because in his 5 criteria, I think it was number 2 or 3, he speaks of the fact that it is the bishop, not the presbyters. That's not entirely true.
Right.
Anybody who is given holy orders, you're separating holy orders. Yes, when you look at it, there is a bishop, a presbyter priest, and a deacon, but you cannot be a priest without having been ordained through the diaconate. You cannot be a bishop had you not been a part of the presbyteros. These things are required, and as they say, like, a priest is always a deacon, and a bishop is always a priest, and a pastor and a deacon, because they are connected to the same right. Yes, there is a different ceremony for one who becomes a priest, and some people are deacons their whole lives. Some people are priests their whole lives.
Right.
But these are not that inseparable, because a priest can say that a presbyter, because can you pull that? I don't remember what minute mark that is. I think it was number 2. When a priest is sitting as a representative of the bishop in a confessional booth and absolves people from sin, he is sitting in the place of in persona Christi.
Of course.
When he is bringing before the people the body and blood of Christ, he is in place of the bishop and Christ. He is in persona Christi. So to treat the presbyter as if he's not in some sort of succession here is a little bit odd to me, because they are working in unity with the bishops as they are working in unity with Christ himself.
Yes. It's a great point. Very, very good point there.
And by the way, this isn't a nuanced idea that comes later. I mean, we see this, that when particularly Ignatius wrote to the Smyrnans, he talks about how things should be done. He talks about marriages being done with the approval of a bishop. He talks about everything. Nothing should be done without the bishop. I'm going to read it in chapter 8. See that you all follow the bishop, even as Jesus Christ does the Father, and the presbytery as you would the apostles.
Yes.
Like, notice that these parallels is the bishop is serving in place of Christ himself, and these presbyters are serving the bishop as the apostles are serving Christ, and reverence the deacons as being the institution of God. Let no man do anything connected to the church without the bishop. Let that be deemed proper. Let that be deemed a proper Eucharist, which is administered by either the bishop or by one whom he has entrusted. That's the presbyter. Wherever the bishop appears, let there be a multitude of people also be. Even as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is a Catholic Church. It is not lawful without the bishop either to baptize, celebrate the love feast, Eucharist, by whatsoever he shall approve of. That is also pleasing to God, so that everything that is done may be secure, and here it is, and valid. There's the word right there. That is Ignatius of Antioch around the year 107, who is a disciple of the apostle John, who is also working in line with the succession lines of Antioch from Peter. And therefore he is communicating with Polycarp. We have their correspondence, and we have the letter that he wrote to Polycarp, and we have Polycarp responding back, not to him, but to the church of Philippi, referring back to this letter that he had received. And so here are two disciples of John himself. We have to conclude this, William. We have to conclude that either these men, Polycarp, Clement, Ignatius, and maybe those who authored behind the document, the Didache, had done some great grand conspiracy when John died around the year 101, 102, according to Jerome. And then a couple years after, they had a secret meeting, and they decided that they were going to hijack the church, change its ecclesiology, and ordain their own form to replace that which the apostles truly left behind. And that became the standard all the way to today in the Catholic Church. That there's no other conclusion to what he just said to the Smyrnans, that nothing is to be done without the bishop. No marriages, no baptisms, no love feasts, and that if there is no bishop, there is no church, and that there is an order where he has ordained priests to serve Christ's ministry to the people on the behalf of in persona Christi, if you would. It's all there. It's all in one single paragraph in just one section of the writings to the Smyrnans.
And incredibly early on as well, very, very early writing. And as you said right there, the only way that you can really try and swipe that away in terms of its relevance or in terms of how powerful it is to come up with some kind of grand conspiracy theory. But you run into all kinds of issues without us even going into that right now, be a topic for a whole other show. You don't just have the early church fathers as well confirming the views on the Holy Eucharist. You even have early enemies of the faith that are confirming what the believers, what the followers of the Christ, who in their eyes, for these enemies, in their eyes, all Christ was a crucified criminal. They were followers of the crucified criminal, and they confirm what these followers believed. So this kind of grand conspiracy theory, it really but it really does fall apart miserably. Go ahead, brother.
And as far as Hooker goes, I mean, there's other places like in the laws of ecclesiastical polity, he talks about the episcopacy being received universally throughout the whole world. So he did take a nuance of explaining the bishopric, so to speak, as Gavin says, but let's not handcuff Hooker to a single quote here, because in the fullness of Hooker, he said that the bishopric was good. Now, he, of course, is responding in the English Reformation to what he believes to be abuses of Rome. And honestly, Rome didn't leave themselves a good track record of popes up to this point. When you look at some of the corrupt men that had got in there through money, power, and family name, and family appointing other families to the cardinals, and eventually making it the papacy years later. So, I mean, you have to understand the context from where a lot of these guys, especially in the English Reformation, are coming from. They're trying to hold some sort of balance where it's like, we see the good, we see the necessity of it. We see that it has been universally received throughout the whole world. We see that this has been given by the apostles, but they're also trying to keep in mind abuses that have happened. And so that they are safeguarding it where I'm not saying they're right in doing this, but their reasoning is not what Protestants are trying to argue for, nor is it the position that Gavin would even hold to. Because if you're going to use Hooker, then we need to ask Gavin, like, and he obviously, he's not going to sit here and say, well, of course I'm not Anglican. Right. But if you're going to use Hooker and believe that he has a valid argument against this succession, then you need to also adopt a bishopric, because at no point did he ever remove himself from bishopric. So it must have had essential quality to it.
That's a great response there. And really the heart of, for Catholic, is very simple. And we have the biblical model backing us, and the early patristics, they confirm it as well. The heart of succession is simpler. Very simple. Christ entrusts apostolic authority to the apostles. They transmit that authority through the appointment, through the ordination, the laying on of hands, and that continues in the church's ordained ministry, where you see it throughout the centuries. I mean, it's right there in the writings, century after century after century. And of course, that core is laid out through the early church, early stages of the patristics. And, that is the Catholic position, and it can be proven, as you pointed out, very early on in the early church fathers.
And anything that is done without one has invalidity. And he says that everything should be done with the bishop so that it is secure and valid. And he mentions the Eucharist, even says a proper Eucharist is administered by the bishop. That is a disciple of an apostle. He is either insane, he is either conspired and created a schism from that which was original. And I know Gavin would never say Ignatius was some sort of schismatic who was opposing. So if he's saying it's that important, and he is under not only succession of Peter, but a companion of those with John, then at the end of the day, he either has something that has been safeguarded to him directly, or he has started a new trend and a new tradition.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, no doubt. And that's a very difficult position for Protestants to be in today. When we begin diving into the early church fathers, it becomes a very, very thorny issue. And I've never heard sufficient responses ever. Still to this day, you just don't hear them. Let's go to the next. Okay, right here. Here we go.
Or sometimes it's not defined at all, but people will read later ideas back onto it, or people will look at things like the replacement of Judas in Acts 1 as though that were an apostolic succession in its later definition. But of course, apostle to apostle is not the same as apostle to bishop.
Time out.
Apostolic replacement.
Yes, please. Yes, I was about to pause there too.
In Acts 1, Peter uses the word bishopric.
He does. Acts 1:20.
I mean, let's read it. I mean, folks, don't take our word for it. I mean, understand the word bishopric or bishop is the Latin form of episcopos. So we're talking about this idea of this bishopric, and it's an old, the old English translations loved it. The Bishop's Bible, hello. King James, Geneva did not like terminology like that. They liked the word like overseer because they were mad at England and the Church of England. So, but a lot of old English translations use the Latin form of this, but the bishopric is mentioned. It wasn't just apostle, because they saw a bishopric being formed through the apostles' ministries.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we want to pull up Acts 1, I guess I can digitally do it and read it.
And I got it right here too. I just pulled it up, and I'm going to go on the screen. It's right here, Acts 1:20. Dewey Reams. For it is written in the book of Psalms, let their habitation become desolate, and let there be none to dwell therein. And as bishopric, let another take. Now, I don't remember off the top of my head. Doesn't the King James also have bishopric there? I believe it does.
I think the King James, I'm going to look it up. I should know this. My uproots would be so mad at me right now, because at the end of the day.
It does. I got it. It does.
Yeah. I grew up on the King James, so I'm embarrassed. I've been so far removed from it. That's hilarious.
It does. So I
Yeah.
just looked it up. And in the
Yes.
Greek, you got it right there. Episcopane, autou. There it is.
Episcopane autou. And there it is. Yeah. So episcopane is the episkopos. That's the Greek
Yes.
form. Bishopric is just the Latin. If you were to go to Vulgate or something like that, you will find this
Yes.
idea. So, and by the way, the argument here from Acts 1 is that this is not even the beginning of this, that this is something that was forethought of and going back to the Psalms. Clement of Rome does this in his letter of the late first century. He speaks of the bishopric and its ideas of high priest and deacon being that of bishop, priest, and or high priest, and Levite being that of bishop, priest, and deacon. These parallels goes back to prophecies like Isaiah. So they're saying that this idea of church governments was not something that was instituted even necessarily by them, that they were actually fulfilling that which was foretold through the Psalms, through Isaiah, through these passages. So to say that, well, this is not, we're reading back into it. No, the word is right there in Acts 1 when Judas is being replaced with Matthias. Like this is exactly the word. We're not inserting that. It's there in the text. It's right there.
Yeah, and for him to claim that we're reading later concepts back into the early data is incorrect. It's right there. I mean, it's right there, and this is enormous because Acts 1 is showing you that principle is laid out right there, that the apostolic office is not meant to die with the individual. It is fillable. It is transmissible. This is an issue, and I don't think that he's really dealing with it well at all here, because all we have to do is look at the English and then look at what the Greek is saying. I mean, it's just right there, plain as day.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't shut him core. I was like, whoa. Like, what are we talking
I'm glad
about
you
here?
did that. No, because I was about to pause that there. Audience, if you all are loving this, let us know. Don't forget to hit like. Don't forget to share this. And moderators, do not forget to continue sharing Dr. Boyce's channel link. If you're enjoying this material, he's always doing really good stuff. And let me tell you, he's doing stuff that is heavy hitter, academic, but apologetic level to where you're going to get a lot. You all are going to get a lot of stuff. And I'm going to say something controversial, but I think it might be a little bit better than the stuff James White puts out. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the next timestamp. Okay. Because he does say a lot of stuff. So let's move on to this next point. We have each point written down. Here we go.
New Testament, for example, it really looks like the general picture is 2 offices and a plurality of leadership in each church.
Now, I want to pause very briefly and note that this is a particular apologetic argument that Dr. Ortlund brings up very often in videos of his. He's going to argue here for 2 offices, a plurality of elders, bishop, presbyter are interchangeable. We'll just hear it, audience. For those that may not be aware, that is the argument that he's going to be laying out here.
That seems pretty consistent from the book of Acts and the epistles of the New Testament. And where you have individuals exercising authority, they really don't look like a bishop at all. A lot of times it'll be an apostle or something like that. And in fact, and this is not just a matter of terminology. So, whatever the terms are called, sometimes there's just non-technical words used like leaders in Hebrews 13, but every church seems like it has plurality of leaders. The only real exception will be James in the Church of Jerusalem. Even Titus and Timothy are not really bishops. They're more itinerant in their role. The general church structure looks like 2 offices.
Well, to be very clear, since Timothy and Titus are, they're clearly not mere local pastors in the ordinary sense. They exercise supreme local authority. They appoint leaders. They correct doctrine. They are ordering their particular ecclesial communities. And, that looks more like episcopal oversight than kind of like the kind of flat Presbyterianism that you find in many particular local churches. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that need to be clarified here too,
Yes.
because it is true. At this point, the idea of a diocese was not as common. I mean, this is the beginning stages. There were a lot of traveling bishops who had to appoint people here and then relocate and do it here and then do it here. And so, yes, Titus was at Crete for a while. Yes, it seems like Timothy was at Ephesus, but he was also in other places as well. That's because the bishopric was just in its conception. They are, as the apostles are aging and dying and being martyred, more importantly, they knew that their ministry needed to be continued. And so they were already giving off this ministry of succession. We see this in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy by the laying on of the hands, the deposit of faith, the gift that was given into you by the laying on of my hands. I mean, this idea that Paul is giving them instructions to do things like ordain leaders in every city. That doesn't sound like a first amongst equals kind of, presbyter in the church. This idea is establishing nuance. Here's the thing. Deacons weren't being established in Crete, but they were in Ephesus. When you look at the qualifications, where's the deacons in Crete? Well, they didn't need them yet because it's a new work. What we're seeing in the beginning of the New Testament is the beginning stages of this that doesn't really come into full fruition until the 2nd century. And Clement of Rome, who was the successor of St. Peter and Paul, he's mentioned by Paul in the book of Philippians, in his writing at the end of the first, in my opinion, the end of the 1st century in the 90s, he says this: the apostles have preached the gospel to us from the Lord Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ has done so from God. Christ therefore sent forth by God, and the apostles by Christ. But these appointments then were made in an orderly way according to the will of God. Having therefore received their orders and being fully assured of the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, established the word of God with full assurance of the Holy Spirit, they went forth proclaiming the kingdom of God at hand, and thus preaching through countries and cities, and appointed the first fruits of their labors. That's people like Timothy and Titus, having first proved them by the Spirit to be bishops and deacons of those who had afterward believed. Now, here's the thing. Gavin does this with Clement, and so does everybody else. They run to this, say, see, there's no presbyter, except for the point that he does mention presbyters in a separate place going into the priesthood. And I always talk about how this throws me off is that if you go through Clement, why, from two perspectives, why does he mention 3 offices in another section and parallels them with what I said earlier, high priest, priest, Levite, with bishop, presbyter, and deacon? Second, who the heck does he think he is writing a church in Corinth from Rome and giving them instruction about how he is correcting the fact that they remove their leaders like Congregationalists?
Right.
Who does he think he is to write across from Rome to Corinth that you have made egregious errors? You have not listened to Paul, who talked to you and told you about your division problem. You have not listened to him. Like, who does he think he is? So much so that Dionysius of Corinth, at the end of that century, ends up writing back to another papal figure who also wrote a letter to them and said, hey, we're reading your letter along with Clement. To this day, every Sunday, we're reading these letters. Why are they still reading Clement of Rome's letter almost 100 years later, just under 100 years later? Why are they still reading it in their church services and liturgies every single Sunday? Because he obviously was an authority from outside of their jurisdiction, I would argue the papacy. And there's no doubt. And there's things going here. Like, I don't understand this. Like, what, you cannot just go to chapter 42 and 43 of First Clement and skip 38, 39 and skip 44 and get the whole context of what he's building an argument for and say, see, 2 offices are only mentioned. No, 3. And the whole parallel of Old Testament layout is painting the picture for us. It's a bad argument.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up there. In particular, the whole way that he's writing that letter, Pope St. Clement of Rome, it's very clear the chair of St. Peter was already functioning. There's just no doubt about it here. The way that we read, the way this is written. And correct me if I'm wrong, you would know this better than anyone else. St. John the Apostle would have been still alive, right?
I think so.
Or no? You think he would?
No, I think he is. I think John is still alive. I think John died, according to Jerome's calculations, around what I think about closer to 102.
Okay, so he would have been alive.
So if Clement of Rome is writing in 96, I believe between 96 and 98, I think closer to 96. I think that John was alive. And some people would argue that Clement of Rome is even earlier, which
Right.
makes it even more likely that John is still alive.
Let me ask you this. In academia, is that a tenable position to hold?
Oh, even liberal scholars that I know would place Clement at the end of the first century. And some would go up to 100, but I know atheist scholars who put Luke in the 2nd century, but have Clement in the late 1st, which is odd.
Sure.
So
Right. Yeah. I agree. And yeah, this is a pretty important, faithful, because Rome is intervening here in Corinth, and they're doing so without being invited. There's a crisis going on here, and the response is, look, it's not from Jerusalem, it's not from Ephesus, it's not from Antioch, it's from the Church of Rome. And Rome steps in unprompted. And what does Rome do? Well, Rome exercises oversight over another apostolic church. And we know that this was done in powerful authority. St. Irenaeus tells us just a few years later. I don't know the exact location. I think it's in Against Heresies. I don't remember where it is off the top of my head. But let me tell you one thing. It is not merely honorific prestige, as some people try to claim. It is a jurisdiction that is laid out here in this particular letter, because Pope St. Clement of Rome is writing, and the guy's he's not just merely advising. The tone to me is a commanding tone. What are your thoughts?
yeah, he's a pastor. He's asking like a pastor. And so, and why did the apostles ordain the bishopric? Well, he tells us. He says, our apostles, chapter 44, knew through our Lord Jesus Christ that there would be strife on account of the office of the episcopate. For this reason, therefore, inasmuch as they had obtained a perfect foreknowledge of this, they appointed those ministers already mentioned, and afterward gave instructions that when they fall asleep, should approve other men who should, here it is, succeed them in their ministry. Yes. We are of the opinion, therefore, that those appointed by them or afterward by eminent men with the consent of the whole church, who have blamelessly served the flock of Christ in a humble, peaceable, and disinterested spirit, have for a long time possessed the good opinion of all, cannot be justly dismissed from their ministry. Because these Congregationalist people were like, well, just vote out the episcopate, we'll just get rid of bishops. And it's like, yeah, no, you can't. Because why can't you do that? Because these men were appointed by the successors of the apostles themselves, and they knew that if you don't have bishops, people would fight over who's in charge. So they settled it before they died and told their successors to settle it before they die. And so he's already telling us, why did the apostles knew through the wisdom of Jesus that if there is no bishop, people would fight over who's in charge.
Yeah.
What is happening in the Protestant world without bishops? What does it look like to be without a papacy and its bishopric? It looks like people fighting over who's in charge. It has become democratic. It has become a fight of validity, and they have no barriers to protect them from more schism and more schism and more schism because of who's in charge. We don't like that person in charge, we'll start a schism. Well, then we exist for a while. We don't like that leader, well, we'll just branch off of that one. That's why there's so many letters in the alphabet soup for Anglicanism that I can't even keep up with how many Anglican groups are anymore, because they broke from each other over a bishop they didn't like. And that's what it does. When you don't have the proper bishopric that starts with the hierarchy that goes back to the apostolic roots through a papal figure like Clement, then it falls apart, and now it's a fight over who's in charge.
It's a mess. It really is a mess within Protestantism at large. It truly is. And it's an unfortunate thing, as you see liberalism running rampant in many of these churches. It's just, and look, let's be very clear. Nobody here is pretending that you don't find it in many Catholic churches. Nobody's pretending. The difference is that I can open up my catechism, and if there is a priest preaching that the Immaculate Conception is not true, well, we can definitively say they're not teaching Catholic doctrine. We can do that. Unfortunately, within Protestantism, there is an issue of all kinds of wild interpretations and different views that many different Protestant churches have. It's just a total mess. Yeah. And what Dr. Ortlund'S doing here, he's trying to jump from the issue of terms being fluid early. Okay, terms are fluid early. He's going from that to the logic of, okay, well, therefore, apostolic succession would not be divinely required for Eucharist validity. But the conclusion doesn't follow. It doesn't follow because the validity is about whether Christ entrusted the Holy Eucharist to an authorized ministry. And that is something the early church always consistently, in every century and every father, treats that as tied to ordained oversight, doesn't it, brother?
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree.
That's a tough one to get around. A really, really tough one to get around. Oh my goodness, I forgot that in that timestamp. I believe. Okay, this is going to be a good timestamp. Right here we go.
In the New Testament text itself. And the reason I wanted to mention that, especially from Titus 1 there, is just to talk a little bit about the first epistle of Clement, because I think you find the same kind of logic here. For example, note what comes.
Not at all. No.
And I answered a lot of this ahead of time. Sorry,
You
I got ahead of you.
No. I'm going to be honest. I forgot that was coming up in this particular point. But yes, you did answer. I think you answered pretty much the majority.
So now that everybody's heard the whole context, let's hear what he has to say in keeping with what we just established.
Yeah, no doubt. And let me ask you this. Do you agree that it's just kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of odd that he would hop on Pope St. Clement of Rome? I don't think Pope St. Clement of Rome helps his case at all.
No, I think that it contradicts his case because the whole letter, just the occasion of the letter, before you read the first word, is already a contradiction. A bishop in Rome is writing to a church who just turned into Congregationalists and went rogue and started removing people who were ordained under succession as if they had the power to do it to begin with, is a reason to doubt that Clement should be used for Protestantism at all. It's already off. And again, if he's just some really cool guy who helped set him straight one time long ago, why are they still reading his letter in the liturgical services on Sunday with the other bishop of Rome at the end of the 2nd century who is writing to Dionysius and talking about why is the current leader in Rome's letter being read out loud? The former predecessors and successors and all these people that are being respected from Rome being utilized in Corinth over 100 years later, under 100 years later, in a manner that is almost used liturgically with other New Testament documents that are being read in church. Why? Because they obviously had greater weight than just a guy with an opinion who wrote a letter to tell everybody to cut it out.
Absurdity. Complete absurdity. Great points there. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Just a bit after the passage I cited earlier, that there be strife on account of the office of the episcopate.
True.
This is from chapter 44, where you find the same kind of terms. This reads a lot like Titus 1 or Acts 20. Our sin will not be small if we eject from the episcopate those who have blamelessly and holily fulfilled its duties. You got to love these ancient translations. You got to use a word like holily sometime in your life. Blessed are those presbyters who, and then it describes them. And this feels kind of like the mayor and then city governor, right? The flow of thought doesn't really make sense. If Clement were talking about two different offices and suddenly he switches from talking about one office to the other, that disrupts the argument that he's making.
Let's go back. Put that on the screen and pause it. So here's the thing.
Right there.
One office.
What is the episcopate? The episcopate is not the person, but the office.
Yep, 100%.
So the episcopate, the bishopric, is the office. The bishop is the person in the office. Notice one of these is the office, the other is the person. I'm going to say this again. All bishops are presbyters, but not all presbyters are bishops. Can they be used interchangeably at certain points? Of course they can, because they're always going to be a part of that. The priest is not like a priest by himself independently is not a bishop, but a bishop will always be a priest.
Yep.
What was the issue here? By rejecting the presbyters, they were ejecting the office of episcopacy, meaning this was an issue of ecclesiology, not just ethics. They were not just removing people. By removing the people, they were rejecting episcopacy.
Yeah.
For example, remember what Ignatius said to us, that these presbyters were serving at the hand of the bishop. If a bishop sends 7 presbyters into the towns of Corinth, everybody gets together and says, I don't like Joe. Joe's an awful priest. His homilies suck. I don't like the way that he talks to Billy over here. And everybody's mad at Joe, the priest. And so they find a way to get rid of him. When they remove the servants of the bishop and they reject him and they kick him out and they get a vote together, which they didn't vote him there to begin with. He was appointed, and they get rid of him. Did they actually just reject the presbyter? No. They rejected the episcopate. And let me take this a little bit closer to home here. They rejected the bishop's ordination of a person that he appointed to that location. So if somebody, let's take it to the biblical text. If Titus put people on the island of Crete, and the people on the island of Crete go, I don't like, Henry over here, who was, I know I'm using English names at this point, but like Henry over here on the island of Crete, we don't like him, and we're going to kick him off the island. He's done. We don't want him. We don't like his leadership. Are they rejecting Henry? Yes, but they're rejecting Titus, who was told to appoint him there. So they are not just rejecting the presbyter, they're rejecting the episcopacy and the bishopric's ecclesiology. Let's take this a little bit closer to home. Let's go further back than that. When Jesus said that people had rejected him, they rejected the Father. It's because he was sent on a mission by the Father. So he says, whoever believes in me has accepted and believed in the Father. Whoever, how do you say something like that? Because he was the representative that God himself had given to humanity during this point. And to reject him is to reject the Father. And so to reject the presbyter is to reject the episcopacy. You are removing presbyters. You didn't just reject the presbyter. You have now eliminated episcopal order because you've rejected not a man that you voted in, but a man appointed by a bishop who is appointed by Jesus through the bishopric of the apostles, which is also a rejection of God himself. You've collapsed the whole system of God by rejecting the presbyter. This is not disconnected thoughts. They are fully functionally connected.
What a magnificent way you broke that down. And that's the beauty of I'm very happy we have a great editor here. He'll take that and make a great clip of that. This is great the way you laid it out there. And you've got that biblically as well. How you laid out how the episcopate is the office, the bishop is the person. It's right there in the Bible. We looked at it a little while ago when I put the text up. It's there right there in Acts 1:20. You've got the episcopate there. The episcopate is the office, not merely a function. And then you've got, well, what do you have? You have the bishop is the person who holds that particular office. And that's how Acts 1:20 lays it out. What does it say? Let another, and as the King James and Dewey Reams say, let another take his bishopric or his office. That office exists independently of the individual. And the person is inserted into the office. So, yeah, that's a great way you laid that out. And I see people caught that, but you laid it out great. All bishops are presbyters, but not all presbyters are bishops. And I have to say, that particular point and that particular, the way you laid it out is, in my opinion, is devastating for Protestantism. Devastating. Because, and you pointed it out, a bishop doesn't cease to be a presbyter. He doesn't. And there's a clear reason why we can see how these terms are used interchangeably at times. But you see the Protestant confusion is that, and we see this very often, even if Gavin doesn't flat out say it, so many others have said it without any nuance. They flat out will say that there is, they'll say that the interchangeable language is indicative of an identical office, and that's false. That's flat out false.
Well, we believe in that regard too, that these presbyters are working in place of their bishop. I mean, you know this. I mean, you go to Holy Mass on Sunday at the altar with Leo, our Pope, and my Jock, our Bishop. Why are they doing that? Because that priest is not an independent person representing himself.
Exactly.
He has been appointed by the bishop of the diocese, who is appointed by the Pope himself. And so that we are in communion with the episcopacy. And so for me to get up on Sunday and rally up 75, 80 people to say, I don't like Father Smith. I don't like the way he's, let's get him out. Let's run him out. I didn't reject Father Smith.
Right.
I rejected Bishop Jock, and I rejected Pope Leo. And not only did I reject them, I rejected the whole structure of episcopacy, and I went to congregationalism.
Yeah.
That's what's happening in Corinth, and that is what Clement is calling out.
Yeah, that's a great way. And Dun64, shout out to you, brother. Thank you for the support. He says, God bless you. Thank you for this wonderful information. Despite the fact that he superimposed my face on the face of a black Hebrew Israelite apologist, we still tell you thank you. I've got great people that come to this channel, man. And now they're going to be going to your channel, Stephen. These guys are going to be going to your channel now, man. Wait till they superimpose your face on the body.
I've already been turned into an icon on a coffee mug and a t-shirt and apparently coffee holsters. So I don't know. I just let people do their thing. I stay out of it.
We love Dun64. Love you, brother. Thank you for your support. All right, let's see. Let me get the timestamp. And by the way, audience, we're going to go for about an hour and a half. So we got about 20 more minutes. So we'll take about 10 minutes of your Q&A. Send whatever you have on your mind. Let us know. And yes, moderators, you guys are doing a great job. Don't hesitate. Please continue sharing the link to Dr. BOYCE'S channel. And we remind you all, don't just subscribe. Tap that notification bell so you can find out when he goes live, when he posts anything new. You will get the information updated there.
Yeah, and if you want to check out the most recent, I also have a co-host in a lot of videos. I just did one by myself on the authorship of 2 Peter, which is heavily disputed in today.
I saw that. I can't wait to watch that, man.
Yeah,
and I got to grab you and snag you. I forgot to tell you. The Apocrypha Apocalypse crew, as you know, I do a channel as well. We dedicated just everything to the canon. The guys over there, the brother Dr. David Zavaris, and Gary Machuda. I mean, I'm so ashamed that they keep reminding me they want to have you on to talk about that.
Oh,
I mean, I got to do that. We'll talk after.
My doctorate was in canonicity. Of course, it was trained in the Protestant canon, but that has changed.
Right.
But yeah, so absolutely, I'd love to talk anything canon, and there's a lot on that. I also Pat and I are kind of doing this little series of famous excommunication.
Is that your co-host?
Yeah, Pat May. He was an Anglican priest who also converted as we did. Yeah, so good stuff there. But yeah, I did one on Luther's excommunication recently. I did one on King Henry VIII's excommunication. I did one on Napoleon Bonaparte's excommunication and restoration on his deathbed that most people don't know about, even Catholics. So check that one out. And then we're about to release one this weekend on Queen Elizabeth's excommunication after the English Reformation.
And that one will release in the weekend then?
Yes.
Very cool, man. You guys are pumping out.
We're also on all kinds of, we're on 8 other platforms too. So we do YouTube, which is fairly new, about a year and a half. But our older one, 3 years old, is we're on everything from Podbean to Spotify to Apple, you name it, Google. So we're on all those too. If you just like to listen to audio, find us on that. I mean, just look up Facts with the Jerusalem Cross or put my name in there. It'll pull you right up, and you can find us on those platforms as well.
Very cool. And shout out to our incredible moderator, Stacey Long, has provided the link there. Audience, do us all a great favor. Do yourself a great favor. Those are great topics. Those are phenomenal.
What did he say? He said, I didn't know Napoleon. Most people don't. So here's the thing. The same Pope that he kidnapped is the same Pope who took care of his family while he was marooned on St. Helena. And
Wow.
he was the one that sent a priest to give him last rites. I talk about that. So, yes. So the Pope that was kidnapped by
Wow.
Napoleon was the same one who showed love and care. And I read the Pope's excommunication, how it was done for Napoleon and his followers is good. And I believe that it worked him back to repentance because he was haunted by his excommunication. And Napoleon actually said these words, "I die within the Holy Catholic Church." Those were one of his last words. So please check out that episode. I read the edict. I read his statements of restoration.
And I'm sorry, I don't know if that is going to drop this weekend, right?
No, that one's already out.
That one's already out.
Yes,
that one's already out.
Yeah. And I actually put it in a group. So I put together different collections, and that's a part of one of the collections on it's called Famous Excommunications. I think there's 4 in there right now. The one on Queen Elizabeth will be released this weekend.
Very nice. That's the one this weekend. Well, you definitely got people that are tuning in from your channel or people that may know you. VMOKAA. I have not seen them on my channel before, or maybe I haven't noticed. Forgive me.
I don't know.
They said that I watched it. Second Peter. Yeah. They loved it.
Good. Great stuff.
Very, very cool. And audience, definitely, if you are here in my channel and you haven't checked him out yet, definitely he does phenomenal, great work. And I think you've even done a video on icons and statues, haven't you? Have you done one?
Yeah, I had my friend James Gilbert on. He's the Eastern Orthodox, and we actually teach in the same place, but he goes to St. John of Lateran over here. It's an Orthodox church. And so we kind of teamed up and talked about it together. And so he's a great guy. I mean, very fair for Orthodox guy. We keep good friends.
Awesome. Good guy then. Good guy. And we love our Orthodox friends. We love our Orthodox brothers and sisters. We definitely do. Yeah. And they share the love of icons and statues with us. They do.
Yeah, I would say they outdo Catholics on icons.
I'm trying to catch up, man. I'm trying to catch up with it. But they got us there, man. But I know many. Here's the one thing there's a good battle against our Latin Catholic community where they love their statues and images.
They do.
They go head to head there. I put them up head to head anytime.
But you take the standard Catholic parish versus, and especially in America, next to an Orthodox, it's not even close on the amount of icons in a single place.
But we got our Eastern Catholic churches.
Yeah, I love the Byzantine rite. It's great.
Oh yeah. Have you ever been to a Byzantine liturgy?
Yeah, there's a Maronite about 10 minutes from here. And, they have a lot of that similarity, but the actual Byzantine Rite Catholics, the closest one's about an hour north of me. And we are going to plan a trip there. So, but I've watched obviously live videos and stuff. And so I love the beauty of.
You're very well aware of it and everything.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Very beautiful.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. Let's let's check out a little bit more, and then we'll go we'll take some questions here. This will be a good one. Send
your super chats. We want to hear your questions. Send them in.
Yeah, you all send your super chats in. We'll snag them right now. We're going to hear what St. Ignatius has to say, then we'll dive in. We'll check out what you guys have to say.
Here, where you get the first testimony of the emergence of a clear distinction between the office of bishop and presbyter is in the letters of Ignatius. He has an extremely exalted view of the role of bishops. He sees them as central to church unity, necessary for Eucharists, to be obeyed. They're like in the position of God, for example. Let me give an example of this. Basically, he says...
Sounds to me like he's admitting that St. Ignatius is devastating to his own thesis, isn't he?
Yeah. And we read this section here to the Smyrnans because, again, if you understand the teaching of in persona Christi and you understand how this works and you understand what Jesus was saying in John 14, again, the Catholic teaching on that makes far more sense with what Jesus was doing in John 14.
Oh, yeah.
Far more sense.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt. It makes way more sense. All right, here we go.
The bishop, even as Christ does the Father. He has the very clear throughout his letters, the 3 offices, bishop, presbyter, deacon. And here, note the last sentence, where it's a proper Eucharist, which is administered either by the bishop or by one to whom he has entrusted it. Now, so this is where your people are going to start to appeal to apostolic succession. But I'd like to point out a couple of things. First,
Of course we are. Of course.
Because
and
that
rightly
wasn't simple enough.
right. That wasn't simple enough. I mean, I think he could tell. Look, he knows St. Ignatius is saying bishops are central to unity, and the Eucharist is proper only as administered by bishops or as delegates. That's already the Catholic instinct.
As Jesus
right?
is the delegate that came and was sent by the Father, so too the presbyter of the bishop. Do you see it? Folks, do you see it? It's self-contradicting to his statements this whole time. As the Father sent the Son, so the bishop sends the presbyters.
Yeah, without a doubt. And look at what you got here. He's already, this is so clear in St. Ignatius that the Holy Eucharist, it's not a free-for-all act of, of any sincere Christian gathering. That right there refutes his thesis. It's devastating to it. And I think he can tell that. I think he knows that already.
Well, he's about to explain it away. So carry on.
First of all, we have to ask the question, what does the word bishop mean for Ignatius? Again, the later developments get read back into the earlier data.
No.
Ignatius himself does not.
No one had a
don't.
different position. Nobody
No,
had
they
a different
don't.
position. The only later developments can be Protestantism because everybody else had bishops. Even the heretics had bishops. The Donatists had
They
bishops.
did. Right.
They all had bishops. Like the only ones who didn't were rogue groups that faded and died out and didn't make it. These are the ones that Tertullian was talking about. These are the ones that he said, you say, oh, we come from the apostles. Show me your papers. Show me your lists.
Yes.
If it doesn't have John or doesn't have Peter or their successor Polycarp or Clement on it, we don't accept you. However, he did say that there were churches that were forming without bishops. But what they did after they were discovered, when they were discovered that, oh, there is a continuity to our beliefs, what they did at that point deemed whether or not they were going to be accepted and received or treated as outcasts.
Yep.
So yes, there were churches forming without them that were being discovered. But then once the rubber met the road and then they had to make a decision, oh, we have the right doctrine, but not the right ecclesiology. Now you've got a choice. You're going to match those two things together or you're going to work against it, which will eventually fall apart. The ones that continued, even heretical groups, understood who were kicked out, had to come back and try to plead with bishops to restore them after the ones that excommunicated them died. Yes. Why? Because even heretics respected this office. Let's not act like we're the ones with some nuanced idea who have imposed an idea 500 years ago onto something 1,500 years ago, when our position in the East and the West, I don't care where you go. I don't care if it's Orthodox tradition. I don't care if it's Catholic tradition or in the Church of England's tradition. They all take you back to a bishopric. They all take you back to commonality. How is that new modern idea thinking that's been imposed on these ancient texts when the ancient texts have been the established doctrine and teaching this whole time?
Yep.
The only ones that changed it was in the 16th century.
That's correct. Yep, that's when and you can trace it. You can look at the writings of the early fathers. You can see when it was changed, and you can definitively show that and prove that. And Gavin knows that. Gavin knows that. He knows how devastating to his thesis St. Ignatius of Antioch is. And as he pointed out, he's writing very early on, a disciple of the great St. John. It's just devastating to the whole Protestant position.
The word episcopos just means an overseer, somebody who has been given oversight. And we see that functionally in Acts 1. Why was there a need to replace Judas? Because there was going to need to be a continuation of the ministry when people were dying off or apostatizing in Judas's case, or both in his case. He died and apostatized. Yep. So there needs to be this continuation that oversees the teachings, the doctrine. That's John 14. The Spirit will bring back remembrance. Things that he was saying that to the apostles, not just anybody. He also talked about the idea of binding and loosening in John's gospel.
That's
you
correct.
have been given the ability to bind and loose. Specifically, that goes back to Matthew 16 with Peter. And then he gave it to the authority of all the apostles, that there would be a binding and loosening. This takes place because that was designated to people who are in position of overseeing his church. Yes. And so by that, that was to continue beyond their lifetimes. And we see evidence of this in the epistles of Timothy and Titus. We see this in examples of men that have come along the side of John, who he references, and people that were appointed in churches and people who are going against those appointments. So again, there are things that when you look at this to say like, well, we need to define terms. Not only do we need to define them, we can see how they functionally are working in the New Testament. We don't even have to go to Ignatius. He's just continuing what was already being established earlier than him.
Yep. That's all he's doing, continuing it. I mean, it very clearly comes before him. It's not a novelty. He's not creating it. It is already established, and he knew that his audience that would be reading his letters would be well aware of this.
It's only Protestants who are reading back their tradition into these texts.
And I've got to say, trying to read back your tradition into these texts, it becomes a mess. It doesn't work at all. You have to invent all kinds of conspiracy theories that simply don't work. Unfortunately, the early church fathers, they do a number to any of the Protestant claims. They really do. All right, audience, we're going to take some questions because we're going to go at least about 5, maybe 7 more minutes, audience. We want to look at the incredible brother, Daniel. Daniel, thank you for your support, brother. He's asking, how do the writings of church fathers like St. Ignatius, the great St. Irenaeus, and Tertullian, how do they support the Catholic claim that apostolic succession preserves the authority, the teaching of the apostles through bishops?
Well, they give us the continuity to what we just talked about when we're looking at Acts, so we can kind of gauge this. So Ignatius is writing right after John's death. Clement is writing before John's death. These are successors. Clement specifically was listed by Paul himself. And so we see that these people are connected to the apostolic group. And now they're explaining to us what happened. The New Testament doesn't. So we have a late 1st century idea. We have a early 2nd century idea. Now we have a mid 2nd century idea with Polycarp. Now we have a late 2nd century idea, Irenaeus. Now we have Tertullian in North Africa, who came from Rome, who's defending legally, because he was a lawyer, defending legally Christianity in North Africa. What are we seeing? We're seeing that the consistency of this has been carrying on multiple continents and through major heresies, major schisms. That continuity is maintained. So you kind of see a golden thread that continues through history. So they are continually putting pieces of the puzzle together so we can see the whole picture.
I agree 100%. And you look at, in particular, the writings of the great St. Ignatius of Antioch, and his statements refute the idea of self-appointed ministers. All you got to do is read his writings. And notice how, for St. Ignatius of Antioch, you read his writings, that he never comes out and defines apostolic succession because, number one, it already existed. It was already, and it was uncontested at his time. It was normative for the Christian life at his time. That's very clear in him. And of course, St. Irenaeus of Lyon. I mean, it's laughing because, man, you got it all over the place there. Not only do you have, historical, it's traceable, it's normative. His language on Rome as the preeminent example, it's enormous.
He was my patron saint.
Really? Are you kidding me?
Irenaeus of Lyons was my. I almost went with John Henry Newman because he was just given that opportunity. Ooh. Thank God. But
that must have been hard for you.
Yeah, that was a tough one. But Saint Irenaeus was the beginning of moving me in my direction. So I had to go back. I
imagine the text where he says that churches must agree with Rome. That one, that's enormous, isn't it?
I'm still mad at the hyper Calvinists who destroyed his relics.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Don't get me started.
Do we have any relics of his?
Little fragmented forms of it, according to the church.
Oh man,
look that up to confirm it, but it was the. I'm gonna look it up. But carry on to the next question. I'll pull it up.
Yeah, let's go with one more. We'll go with one more, and then we'll wrap it up because we're right around the 1 hour 29-minute mark, audience. And before we're done, we're going to allow the incredible brother Stephen to plug his channel and anything he may be working on.
The Huguenots.
We want you all.
Yeah.
Okay. They did.
1562. Saint Irenaeus' relics were destroyed by Calvinist Huguenots. They pillaged his tomb, which led to the loss and destruction of the saints' remains. Some accounts note that some of the bones were thrown into the river.
Sick.
Yeah. How do you? Anyway.
Yeah, my goodness. I was not aware of that. That's horrifying.
So don't fear him who can destroy the body. Fear him who can destroy both body and soul.
100%. Amen to that. The incredible 39-inch biceps, Roxy. I have a statement here. I always joke around. Whenever anybody makes a phenomenal theological point, I elevate the size of their biceps like an amazing amount. I must have boneheadedly said that about Roxy one of these days, so it's her name. But Roxy is saying, God bless you, Roxy. She's saying, Gavin, who is Clement? What is his title and his role? Yeah, he's the great Pope. And the fact that, look, his letter is being read for a long, long time. His letter is even read publicly. The first letter of Clement carried great weight and authority, even according to the great St. Irenaeus. For quite some time, he's writing with papal power, and it isn't just mere honorifics. He's writing as one that has supreme authority, isn't he?
Yeah, well, I mean, look how many letters didn't make it. I mean, why is his continued? And by the way, his letter traveled beyond Corinth.
Oh, yeah.
The manuscript traditions in which his letter was received and kept goes back even further. And so his letter was not just in Corinth, it was circulating throughout the entire church. We have it in multiple languages. Now,
I've got to ask you this. Have you ever done a video on that?
Yes.
History, or have you written about it? You've done a video.
In direct. Well, my dissertation covered the textual analysis of First Clement. So
my goodness.
I pulled out every Old Testament and New Testament citation he made.
Wow.
And so I did the textual critical analysis of it, comparing it to our modern critical editions of the New Testament, as well as our Septuagints, or forms of the Greek Old Testament and Septuagint, and compared them on the analysis. So he was a huge quoter. His most cited New Testament book was actually Hebrews, believe it or not. 9 times in that letter, he cites Hebrews. He also, fun fact, he quotes the book of Judith and seems to be familiar with the longer recension of Esther, which makes sense. He was using the Septuagint. So
sure. I was aware of those two.
So he mentions Judith, he mentions Esther, but the most cited New Testament book for sure is in my database calculations, Hebrews.
Okay. Now, before we close up the show, I want to shake up things. I want to ask you a controversial question. Who was the author of the letter to Hebrews?
I think it was Luke. I think Luke penned it for Paul. I think that Clement of Alexandria, not Clement of Rome, Clement of Alexandria makes an excellent case that I did not fully agree with for the longest time. So what's really cool is when I did my master's work, I did Lucan material. And one of the weird things is the professor of that program had Hebrews attached to Luke and Acts. And I thought that was really stupid. And so I had to do it. But once I started actually getting into the language, the Greek language of Hebrews, I saw a lot of unique language that is only found in Luke and Acts, especially in Acts. And Clement of Alexandria actually says that Luke was the scribe and that the letter bears witness of that from the language of Acts. And so that theory has been tested, that we do find a lot of uniqueness to what is said in Hebrews that we find in Luke and Acts. So I actually think Clement of Rome may be a part of that, and that's why he uses Hebrews so much. It could just be that Hebrews was written particularly to Rome, in my opinion, and it was a very, very important letter to the Roman Church, and so they regularly used it. But some think Clement, some think Aquila. I mean, there's all kinds of names mentioned in there. Some would say Apollos, but I think it is Luke. I think the language is very Lucan, but I think Paul authorized it.
Sure. And that is what I mean, you echoed exactly what Father Pacqua and the great Christologist Father Daly, they've told me they believe it to be Lucan with Paul in mind is what they said. So okay, yeah. So
I actually argue there's two endings in Hebrews.
Really?
And the only time that happens is there's two endings in Romans. And if you look at Romans' endings between the Byzantine manuscripts as well as the Alexandrian, and I hate using these terms, Alexandrian manuscripts, the ending of Romans is in a very different spot between the two traditions. But there are two endings in Romans, and one of them is a shout out to his amanuensis who gets to name himself in the text. And so Hebrews doesn't do that, but it seems that Paul did insert his signature in Hebrews where there was two endings where the writer and the signature go back and forth and then end the letter. So I actually argue the only other place we see that is in Romans, where Tertius did that for Paul. And so I think that we have something very, very similar there.
That's phenomenal. That's amazing. Now, this is right up your alleyway. We'll wrap up the doors with this one. Mondo says, hi, William and Stephen. Did Saints Peter and Paul write letters that didn't make the canon? Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't think Peter liked writing at all. In fact, that's why I think Mark, if you read the early patristic writings on how Mark came into existence, they compelled Mark to write because Peter didn't want to. So Mark wrote Peter's sermons for him in Rome. First Peter, he uses an amanuensis Silas. If you want to know what I think about Second Peter, you need to go listen to my episode. So it's possible that the writer Jude is the scribe for Second Peter, in some people's opinion. I'm not saying it's mine. Again, you want to hear mine, you got to go back to the episode. But but Peter was not a writer. He's an orator. He's a speaker. Paul seems to have written letters that are not in canon. He speaks of them in 1 Corinthians. He's talking about another letter. A lot of scholarship argues that 2 Corinthians contains parts of that missing letter. We know later, letters came out called 3 Corinthians and things like that people will say, oh, this is probably very short, but it's obviously later. It's not early. But clearly, Paul talks about this writing. He also talks about a writing to the Laodiceans.
And Colossians.
So there's others that are there. So no, not everything that a apostle says or writes is canonical just because they said it or wrote it.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah, I'm glad you brought out that letter from Laodicea. That's a great one in Colossians. And look, I think that more letters are implied. From his correspondence network, I think there are more that are implied. But yeah, you bring up a great point there. Doesn't mean that they should have been canonical, or if even the church had been in possession of them, that they would have become canonical.
And even John the Apostle talks about how he wrote when he's talking.
There you go.
Yeah, he talks about in 3 John. He says that he wrote a letter to try to correct a leader in the church, and he wouldn't heed their words, and so that he was going to confront him in the face. But that letter, we don't have that letter. I wish we did. It'd be great. I'd love to see what John said to him.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. With that in mind, we're going to close the doors to the show today, audience. We've had a great time dialoguing with you, brother. We've had a phenomenal time. We got to do it again. We've definitely got to do it again many more times. It's going to be so much fun. I want to give you a chance before we wrap it up, before we fully close the doors. Plug in anything. Where can people find you? Do you have a Patreon? Do you have anything where people can head over and support the work that you are doing, because you're doing phenomenal work?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So FACTS is an acronym, Fathers, Apocrypha, Canon, Text, Scripture. So we talk anything related to that. I just opened up memberships on YouTube. Again, we're fairly new to YouTube. So I just opened up memberships on YouTube. I also, on any video, there's a link there where people can give. The nice thing about FACTS is that we're ran by a board of trustees, and that board of trustees has worked us through, and we are a 501c3 organization. So if anybody even wants to donate toward the ministry, it is to tax write-off at the end of the year. So there's usually, we use like different platforms like Tithely, but we also opened up a membership that gives extra benefits to people that follow the channel. So those are available for anybody that wants to do that. I don't get on Twitter much because people are nuts on Twitter. So I got into enough arguments. There's like, the heck with this. I have 24 hours in a day and not enough time to deal with this. But I am on there. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. If people want to follow me on social media, they're more welcome to do that. Other than that, like I said, we're on other platforms of your favorite podcast. If it's a downloadable podcast app, you are probably going to find us on there. Look facts and probably put my name in it because that's one of the key searches. And then look for a Jerusalem cross. And if you see the Jerusalem cross with facts, that's me. If not, you're going to find a rap video with Ben Shapiro. And I don't think you. So make sure you put my name in there.
We love it. We love it, brother. Can't wait to be back with you again. We will be back together again soon. God bless you, brother. Definitely be talking to you again. You have a great evening, my friend.
God bless.
God bless.